Yarek, Aisha, Behrad, 2 episodes every week. Leancast, product innovation and UX design podcast.
Hello. It's another episode, Leancast. I'm beyond excited. There are, in my craft, there are people that I bump into their journey and listen to them, and within 5-10 minutes I learn tons. I met this gentleman in product disruption forum in Berlin held by NetGuru. He was on the stage. His calm demeanor and the way he was breaking down his responsibility as product executive charmed me. And this is a person that has been on C-level product executive roles for quite a while. I could easily use the term veteran for his achievement, and I let him to introduce himself, but I need to make sure that his humbleness doesn't get in the way. He's been the CPO of Grover, one of the unicorn startup phenomenons. He is now um, SVP at GoStudent. He has a master in conflict resolution. He has scaled product teams from a team of 8 to over 150. So you're looking at a man that has a thick skin in the game. Without further ado, I would love to welcome Johann Jenson. Johann, I know your schedule is busy. Thanks for coming on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. I mean, after those words, how could I not be fantastic? I mean, I think that's the best introduction I've ever received. So thanks, Behrad. No, really great to be here. I mean, also the funny that we had overlap. I mean, you were at Grover before I was, but actually you did some time with Grover, so you know the early days, what it was like. So no, really cool, and I'm just very curious to see where the conversation goes. So yeah.
I've got all my curiosity as well. Johan, and I would love for you to sort of have this reflection over your career, how you got into the craft of customer experience, product development, scaling teams. I leave it up to you to define the start date. Yeah, walk us through it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can go back pretty far with this too. I remember, so I have four brothers actually, and I have one brother who's 2 years younger than me. And when we got like fast internet in Canada, in Saskatchewan, where I grew up, like we were obsessed. Like my dad had to take the power cable from the computer and hide it on us like all the time. So we were just upset. And so my brother wanted to be a game designer and he was just playing video games nonstop. Like we had like Saskatchewan's really cold. So wintertime, like there's not much for you to do unless you play ice hockey or you play on your computer. So like for me, it was the computer, and I was obsessed with designing websites. Like I really thought this was the coolest thing ever. My brother was obsessed with like designing games or playing games for that matter at that time. And so yeah, it just started from that. I think my dad had the first Super 8 motel in Canada, and I built him a website when I was like I don't know 12 or 13 or something. And that was how I got started. I built stuff that people used, and then like back in the day, I think you had like Lycos had some kind of statistics platform. So I really loved seeing the analytics. I loved seeing people use things that I made. And then it just like went from 12 years old until I was 17. I was like constantly just working on. I was a terrible programmer, so I had to like hire people to like build like PHP scripts and things like that for me. But that's kind of how it got started. I think the obsession started there, and I think that gave me like a real I guess advantage in my career early on because I was just doing things at a very early stage. So I got a bit of a head start. So I don't know if like I was incredibly talented or I just had like a lot more time to get used to some of these tools and kind of ways of working. Yeah. So I mean, I guess I mean if I had to summarize the last I guess what 20 some years.
Mhm.
I mean, it's really hard because my career has gone like all over the place, all over the world. But I think the common thread has always been kind of like making things that people use and getting this like kind of excitement and enjoyment out of it.
It's interesting because you had a similar dynamic with your brother that I had with my brother. I wasn't into so much building at that time, but he used to play a lot of video games. I used to sit with him and like give him like my eyes. Hey, the door is over there. Like we were sort of like collaboratively like finishing games.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think it was that, and also kind of the relationships that we made online. Like back it was like ICQ times, right? So, all the like just this idea that you could like work with people online from around the world and connect with them. For me, like just yeah, seemed really exciting. My brother had his ICQ friends. I had my ICQ friends. And then I started
I
like branching out within school because like I mean, I went to a small French high school in Saskatchewan, so I had like one really like kind of nerdy friend. Like I remember we used to sit in math class, we talk about like hardware. Like my dream was to work on a laptop. That's all I wanted because back then laptops were like they weren't like ubiquitous
Yeah.
like they are now, right? So that was really my dream to be able to do that. And I think so. Then when I finished actually university, and that's another kind of chapter where like I actually didn't study like I didn't study computer science, which would have made a lot of sense at the time, or design or anything like that. I actually studied political science, but when I finished, I just hit the road, and I was like, I was I guess back then there was no word for it, but I was a bit, I guess I was a digital nomad in my early 20s. So yeah, that's how I got started.
And this was when you were
So
in
when I
19.
Yeah,
No.
probably. So I finished university in 2006. So around
Yeah.
that time is kind of when I hit the road. I lived in Mexico for a bit. I was in Latin America, in Argentina, Brazil, Trinidad. I did that for about a year and a half before I got a real job. Well, real job. I guess what I learned in hindsight is that actually the real job was really building things. That's what I really loved doing. But I figured because I had a political science degree, I should go and work for the UN,
Yeah.
and I got this great opportunity to go to Kenya and to work at the Environment Program headquarters. So it's something I really couldn't turn down. So I did that, but then I realized actually what I really love doing is making stuff that people use. And so yeah, so my career kind of went back into tech actually.
And what was the role that you took on after that?
So after about 4.5 years at the UN Environment Program, because they're headquartered in Nairobi, and I was already doing even at the UN, like I was consulting, and so I had a few gigs with like different UN organizations or different agencies. I even built the tourism website for South Sudan, kind of randomly. There, like so, like the Wildlife Conservation Society, which is financed by the Bronx Zoo in New York. They're quite a large kind of conservation organization. Someone just like reached out to me out of the blue in Nairobi because they'd seen some other websites that I'd made across like different UN organizations, and they're like, "Hey, do you like I've got this weird project? Are you interested?" And they're like, "Yeah." So like South Sudan sees a big opportunity in tourism. Like it recently come out of kind of pretty serious conflict period, and they'd like, this might be a great way for to rejuvenate kind of the brand and bring tourists in. So yeah, so I spent some time in Juba. Yeah, yeah, cool. Shoot.
Okay. So I think we're good.
Yeah.
We should be good. So you were like doing tourism websites. Let's go from there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I was so at the time. I mean, this was towards the last couple of years in Nairobi. I started taking on more consultancy work. So I wasn't just purely the program officer at the Environment Program, but I started doing things for like the Convention on Migratory Species or the UN Red Program. Or like there was a marine biodiversity unit as well that I did some stuff for. So like I was kind of picking off these like smaller projects to do on the side. And yeah, so the Wildlife Conservation Society reached out to me and they wanted to do a tourism website for South Sudan. And that was just like, it was just so random, but like, incredible. Like I got to go to Juba and meet with all these government ministers. So although that was kind of cool, like it wasn't really kind of like scratching this itch that I had to be building stuff at scale. And so I had a hobby website that I'd built for like accommodation bookings in on this island off the coast of Kenya called Lamu Island. So at the time, it was just a kind of a hobby because I was going to this beautiful place often. There's no cars on this island; you just have donkeys. And I was just obsessed with kind of the architecture there. You had these like beautiful Omani houses. Yes, so we made like a map of the island and we started renting kind of this luxury accommodation. Like the first house that we listed on the website was from the Peugeot family. And they just kind of wanted to show off their beautiful house on this island in Kenya. But then they also wanted to cover some of the costs that came with having this property. So we started scaling that, and actually that hobby kind of turned into my startup, and then eventually I actually left the UN to run this as a full-time thing. Yeah.
And that's a sleep out, right? That's
Exactly.
a.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Uh-huh.
it started out as what we called lamu.org, which was really like kind of the tourism portal for this island. Like we started seeing, oh, what there's actually a revenue model here because you can rent these luxury houses. Like the average price was like €1,000 a night. But then we started also adding a lot of the accommodation that was kind of in the more budget to mid range as well. So you had kind of we had I think 70 different like properties on the island. It's not a very big island, right? So and then we scaled it to Kenya and then beyond that. So I actually ended up working on Sleep Out for about 3 years. And then after a while, I think what we started to see was like we expanded like across Africa, but the strategy was off, right? Like we thought, okay, if you consolidate supply, if you have all of the accommodation listings, they will come. But actually,
Yeah.
it became pretty clear that even if you have supply, it's kind of a winner takes all at a global level. Like Airbnb and Booking.com and these other platforms were better placed to win. So it really was a dream to be able to make this thing happen. And I really, the 3 years that we spent working on it was incredible. But increasingly we realized actually strategically we're not really well placed to win. But yeah, it was an incredible experience.
Out of curiosity, so it's you drop two things that really caught my interest, and I would love for you if you can reflect on it. It's like you said, like you suddenly realize there is a revenue model, and it's very interesting that it comes from you. It clearly shows that you have your experiences come from practical situations. That a lot of startups try to go around the circle, raise money, pre-seed, seed, but there is no revenue model. Like
Yeah,
I look at it, cool idea, but where is this revenue model? And also the second thing that you mentioned also is that uh, Sleep Out was scaling, but you had the wrong product strategy.
yeah,
And I've heard that about another product folk that I had on, and he was emphasizing on the importance of having a well-tested strategy to be able to scale a business or scale a product. So two seats, leave it up to how you want to like take it.
yeah.
I would love for you to reflect on this.
So yeah, I think I mean in hindsight, we ran Sleep Out for about 3 years. In the first 9 months, it was actually just more of a hobby thing. While I
Yeah.
still had like I was working 80% at the UN in my last year, and I was spending a lot of time on this island actually working remotely. And we had like significant revenue in those first few months, and we I think what I really wanted to do was build something that was automated, right? I didn't want to build
Mm-hmm.
another travel agency, and I
Mm-hmm.
also started to realize that everyone's impression of Africa was that you go on safari, and I felt that there was a whole other side to Africa because you have this like incredible properties all over the continent. And keep in mind, I had just spent the last like 4 years going to like post-conflict countries because my background is in conflict resolution and mediation and environmental management. So we were going to you know, like, like Liberia and Sierra Leone or like Cote d'Ivoire or like Ivory Coast, Rwanda, DRC, like not the most like tourist friendly places on the continent. And so I kind of also wanted personally to see another side of Africa, but I also wanted to like promote a different side of Africa because I think people like generally don't know a lot about the continent, like from outside the continent. But what they do know is that like they have this like idea of like safari, right? Like every time I'd come back to Europe or I'd go back to
Yeah.
Canada where I'm from, like people would be like, "Oh yeah, I'm thinking of going on safari." And it's like, yeah, it's like one part of Africa, but like there's this whole other side of the continent, or so many other sides of the continent. So I think it kind of dovetailed with that. It was very much like this selfish endeavor where I was like, I really like beautiful architecture. I like taking photos of beautiful houses, and then also there's a revenue model, which is
Yes.
kind of cool, right? I think that to kind of address the second point, and this is also like the product strategy being wrong, and this is also why I think I take strategy like it's a big part of the work that I do now with like these much larger kind of scale ups. But it's like you could absolutely be riding in the complete wrong direction, and
Hmm.
you can be really successful in riding in the wrong direction, but
Right.
you're not going to win. And I think what in like say the 100 pitches that I did to investors over the course of those 3 years, like we raised 2 rounds, but then it became increasingly evident that we weren't going to win. I very rarely actually had those discussions with investors. It was really interesting. Like they never got to the point of like kind of really putting their finger on why this was not going to work. It was, I mean, you're raising for a B2C tourism product in Africa in 2013, 14.
Too
There's
early.
like it was certainly like a challenging endeavor. At that time, it wasn't clear that Airbnb would kind of have this winner take all
Yeah.
kind of position. But and at the time, HomeAway was actually buying a lot of properties around the world to kind of bolster their inventory because they were going head to head with Airbnb. But Airbnb had this wild organic growth just because of the way they built kind of their onboarding and like it was a beautiful product, right? It is a beautiful product. So yeah, so I think it taught me a lot. I think working also with my CTO at the time, who absolutely brilliant person. He also taught me a lot about what it's like to kind of get your hands dirty and just build, right? So we had these like 16-hour sessions. We would work kind of a lot, but we also kind of would make sure that we had a lifestyle that worked. So like we lived in Mauritius for 1 year, and I remember I used to go to the beach like 4 or 5 times a day, but like for 5 minutes. And honestly, like I've never been so productive in my life, but I've also never been so happy. Like I'd be like, okay, I got 5 minutes before another call. Okay, let me go jump in the ocean, which was like 80 meters away from the house. I jump in and then I'd like walk back, take a shower. Okay, ready to go. And I think kind of finding that balance and that like kind of that motivation, it was like the perfect game that we got to play. Of course, even we'd take like say like Friday or Saturday night off and go sing karaoke or something. But yeah, it was really like we found some kind of a balance because we were so motivated by what we were trying to do. The stakes were high. It was really challenging. We know we were up against this like strategy that was not ideal. And yeah, so for me that was like probably one of the most formative like kind of learning experiences, which then kind of allowed me to like when I came to Europe a few years later, I could do a lot more with a lot less, right? Which when you're in a startup, you need to learn how to do that. And yeah, I think if you start with a lot of resources and you try to learn, with unlimited resources, I think you're obviously almost by definition less efficient. So I think that's kind of what helped us out.
Many different directions I can take this, but like to just reflect quickly on what you said, that I've worked with a couple of CPOs, CDOs, CTOs that are very large at spending. I think sort of like they might associate the C role to being large and expansive and just have unlimited budget, but to your point, you sort of broke it down really nicely. Folks that became CPOs or they got onto C role and they have this background of scaling startups, especially their own. They are more resourceful. They know how to spend, and they are very strategic with the budget. And often, I find them most successful because they came from that resourceful background.
Mm. Yeah, I know 100%. I think it's very easy to forget what product exists to do, right? Product is there to create value for the business and for customers, right? Both of those things. And I think if you have started your own business or you have had, the opportunity to join an early stage startup where you are strapped for cash, where you don't have unlimited resources, you don't have people to do every job, uh, you kind of have to learn how to do that. And like, I think you always tie it back to, am I creating value, or is this thing that I'm doing just kind of, is it just an unnecessary, maybe possibly like bureaucratic exercise? And I think a lot of people never really get outside of that, especially if they end up in a large organization where you're quite disconnected from the value creation a lot of times. And
Yeah.
we would always, I remember, because like when I came to Europe, like after 7 years in Africa, like I moved to Berlin, and my old CTO and I, like, he came to Europe as well. We actually worked at Hilti together for a while, and we were, a lot of companies have created a lot of the value decades ago, and now they're kind of in this milk it stage. And I think that's the biggest like contrast to come from a very poorly capitalized shoestring startup in Africa, and then going to work at a company that has headquarters in Liechtenstein, and that has like this incredible brand, and is able, like, impressive gross margins, and established company that's been around for 75 years. And then that, I think that contrast was like really fun for us, because we were like, wow, we get to work with like these amazing agencies, like, we get to work with like
Yes.
ThoughtWorks, and like the pivotal labs of the world. Like, we got to work with Google X, and like some of the best people in the world. And we were like, what if we had that when we were in Africa? Like, that for us, for me, that was like a huge learning experience as well, because I remember, like, Paul, my CTO, and I, my old CTO, and I, yeah, we would talk a lot about this, and like the compare and contrast was incredible. And I think that's also where you learn so much, because you take a great leap into a totally different domain with totally different resources. So yeah, it was kind of like, it's like a kid in a candy shop. You're all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can have all of this, and I can learn from these people, and I can travel there, and so yeah, it was cool.
So I want to just like drill down a bit on the topic of product strategy, and I think having you here and this, I would like to take advantage of this limited time that I have with you. I talked to Teresa Kane, CPU of TreviPay, and she said something really interesting, and I would like to just say it to you and like get your reaction on this. Is that she said, like, when I started working, we had at TreviPay 5 years ago, we had about 3 competitors, something like this. Now there is over 40, and I feel like now, with the advent of this abundance of automation tools and AI tools, the startups of 5 people, 6 people, 10 people could easily compete with the likes of Stripes of 1,000 peoples, right? So, and this is the game of product development, the game of entrepreneurship is entering in such a fast pace that every 3 days, every week, there is a new revolutionary AI tool coming out that disrupt one industry or disrupt one product category. So I think now, in this very fast paced age of development, having a continuous, well-tested product strategy that evolves as the trends evolve is key for organization to, as you said, it not end up in somewhere wrong or somewhere dead end. So how do you now, like, you're at such a like high position, handling the fate of a big organization, how do you make sure that your product strategy is up to date? I know that it's a very tough thing to answer, so I don't expect you to be spot on, but I just wanted to get your take on this.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely fair, and I think this is where this like existential dread that a lot of people have when they like look at AI or hear about AI. I mean, definitely when ChatGPT kind of made started making waves, as a product person, you feel this massive weight to figure out, okay, how do I defend myself? How do I make sure that we're making use of this new technology? And also you start, like, I guess, just abstract it a little bit, like the adoption curves for technology are increasing with every new breakthrough, but also the potential risks for incumbents increase at the same time, right? And so when like you mentioned, like you can disrupt certain pieces of what Stripe has been doing. I think the hard thing to disrupt though is mindset more than strategy, right? So certainly the product strategy may evolve, but the one thing that I put above strategy is culture, right? So I think essentially, culture, strategy, structure, in kind of in that order. And I think that if you really aim to make sure that those are well set up, then I think you can weather any kind of storm, right? So I think if you have the first thing that I did, and I think a lot of people kind of did this, is that you kind of have to embrace the change that comes with every new technology. And I think this is like a really like key part of like the type of mindset that you want within your product organization, is really not to have this kind of no but attitude towards things, right? Like, because it's very easy to dismiss things quickly if you say no but, because we have other things that we have to focus on. If there's new technology coming, like you do need to have a reserve a certain amount of yourself to like have that kind of curiosity and kind of explore what can be done with it. So like a friend of mine the other like a month or two ago, or like at some point I think after GPT was launched, like he built this thing called Freddy Fun, and it was like a virtual version of my best friend, whose name's Fred. And so and so but for us it was like fun. I think we did it on a Saturday night actually, and then we started like doing like voice clones of his voice, and then so for me that you kind of want that kind of fun within your organization, so you can adopt these changes or adapt to changes as they come. And I think for me that's a key part of being defensible, because this is really what the largest organizations in the world have, that it's hard to value, right? I mean, how do you value Stripe's ability to attract incredible talent? How do you value OpenAI's ability to attract some of the best talent in the world? It's hard to like pinpoint, but I think it is very closely tied to mindset and culture that allows for that that advantage. And I think, I mean, we're seeing also like coming from an education angle, which for me is really new, right? Like the last, I've been with GoStudent for about 7 months now. I'd never worked at an ed tech before this, and starting to see how you think about pedagogy. I'm very bad at saying that word, but how, the science of how you teach, right? So you start to realize that like there's like the way we think about kindergarten to grade 12 learning is pretty like archaic, right? It's pretty old school. It's like we're still teaching kind of a lot of like fact-based learning, which GPT kind of explained like pretty quickly, shows how those things are not super relevant, especially when a machine can do it so much better, right? So you start to think about skill-based or project-based learning as something that even children can do. Like this whole debate around should we allow kids to use GPT because they're just going to cheat, right? So if you change the goal, if you change the focus, or the outcome that you're looking for in education, which is really for students to be able to achieve some kind of a more of a project or skill based mindset, right? And again, so to tie that back to the startup world, like I think you want those same kind of principles in your company, this ability to quickly adapt and learn, this curiosity to use new technology, to build that defensibility. So I guess we're getting a bit theoretical here, but I really think that like that is, I mean, because then you can start to talk about the specifics, right? Like in on our side, like there's like education, I believe, is probably one of the biggest use cases for AI or AI. It's like it's a tool that that opens so many opportunities, and so like I'm super excited to be at GoStudent at this part or at this point in history, because like we can actually have a massive impact using this new technology, and I think we're really well placed to do that with the millions of tutoring lessons that we do every year. So yeah, I guess I've been a bit of a tangent, but yeah, so that's a little bit the way I think of strategy, not just as strategy, but like culture and structure as well, and the three are like really closely interlinked.
I love this tangent, to be honest. You can go deeper. Something that I wrote down my notebook is curiosity with technology. I think is often underplayed. I think is often devalued in the organizations. You said something about companies that they found their product market fit a century ago, and now in this century, no, a decade ago, and now in this decade, they're trying to milk it dry, and they're not adding new values. Um, to reflect on curiosity with technology, the way at Bonanza Design we work is basically that's what we do. We just being curious with technology. We try to experiment stuff. Like, I know that there has been a new wave of AI requests coming our way, so we need to be able to have a response for it, right? So that's what we make money. We offer services, creative services. So my question for you would be, how do you align this in an organization that was, I'm not saying GoStudent or like Grover, I'm just like sort of like an abstract level. How can a CEO, a CPO of a traditional enterprise, so to speak, can sort of like rewrite the culture? So say that, hey, now we need to really like turn our focus to become curious again. Something that we lost, a skill that we lost a decade ago, because now we've been busy like milking the money, so to speak. How is that even possible to start this conversation in an environment that everyone busy counting the money?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, well, my mantra that I repeat, and I think I said this on stage at the disruption panel we were talking, I mean, clarity, energy, fun, right? These are like the three most important elements, I think, of like, a culture that can thrive. And I think so, and maybe it's adaptable to different contexts, right? Like all models are wrong. Uh, all models are wrong. Some are useful. So in this case, like I find this model useful in the current context, but I think different companies might have a different framework for creating that curiosity and that kind of, say, like culture of like disruption and innovation. So I think it's about, well, A, as like a leader, you have to show that kind of that curiosity and energy. So I think for me, one of the most exciting things is when a product manager or designer or someone writes to me on Slack or catches me like in person or on a huddle or on a call, and you can see that excitement about something that they're building or something that they're doing or something that like they didn't expect. Like there's a little bit of surprise, and they get so excited that they come to you and they say, oh, how this thing, we didn't know, but that happened, and then like they can't even, they're fumbling with their words because like they're so excited. So those are the moments, like if you could capture as many of those moments as possible, then I feel like you're winning, right? And so obviously, there's hard work involved in it. There's, I don't know if there was a great podcast that I keep referencing between Lex Friedman and Sam Altman. And at some point he asks like, how do you ship, like, or like, you
Yeah.
guys, you ship. You are a company that ships, as in, you're fast and you're getting product out with OpenAI and the iterations that they're doing. And then Sam Altman launches into kind of how they do that, and he says something like, well, I know it's not popular to say right now, but like hard work is a big part of it. Also, everyone keeps really high standards and they keep themselves accountable to those standards, right? So but I think that there's one line in there where he says we care, and
Uh-huh.
that's like, you can't get excited about something if you don't care about it, right? And
100%.
that's the challenge, right? And I think I think maybe in large organizations it becomes easier not to care anymore. I remember like when I was at the UN Environment Program, like I was 25 years old, and I cared so much about, like, I wanted to save the world. I wanted to save. So our partnership was working. It was a UNESCO partnership working on the survival of great apes. So like bonobos, chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas. and I cared so much about those species because growing up, like my favorite animal was a gorilla, and I cared so deeply about like how do we protect remaining populations of these animals. And I think what shocked me was to see a lot of career kind of bureaucrats that were within the UN Environment Program or different UN agencies, and for them it was just like this was a job, right? Like, and then they would kind of switch, they would kind of hop from one agency to another, and I get that. I mean, I've been doing that, like moving to different domains, but I do it because I want to learn something new,
Yeah.
and then you start to realize that you actually can care about a lot of different things throughout your
Yeah.
career, because you're just basically, I guess, like there's probably some neuroscience to that, right? Like your synapses are firing, because you've really gone deep into something, and it
Right.
takes a bit of time to go deep into something. But yeah, so I guess all of that to say, like, I think, like, yeah, I guess the key is just finding ways to make people care. Uh, so at a very high level, there's probably a lot of different ways to do that, but I think that's the problem that you want to solve.
Wow, this is so touching. Finding ways in the organization for people to care, to start caring about what they're doing. I think that's really key. I had to stop with few folks that I really initially love working with because I essentially realized that they stop, not necessarily stop caring, but their attention or their curiosity has been shifted.
Mm, mm,
It's not, they're not there anymore, and you can feel it as a craft person that another craft person, they're not there, they're not giving it the 100% that they
yeah.
have they had that I had seen them doing. um, and I really don't know how to describe that, but there is, I have a high value and respect for the word craft. I
Mm,
think it's a very honorable term for me. And when I assign someone, like I tell someone, hey, you're a craft person, I really have high respect for it. And I think it's a term that is not being on the surface in our collective consciousness as much as I expect it to be. And I think maybe that's perhaps one of the reasons that organizations, not sure, I mean, it's a big generalization, but big organizations lose their capacity to care about what they're doing, and that's dangerous.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I mean, I was, so when I first started building product for Sleep Out, and it was just my CTO and myself, and we were trying to figure out how to prioritize features, and we were trying to figure out how to spec features out, and it was just him and I, and like I was designing stuff, and then I was handing it, like we were sitting right next to each other, and we were using just a lot of common sense. Like I didn't really know that there were all these like rules around like Scrum and like different like kind of agile
Mm-hmm.
methodologies, and I didn't know all of the product dogma, but I was doing what worked actually, and that is, I guess, the dogma of agile is just do what works. I mean, that's the one thing it's hard to argue with. Like,
Yes.
like do what works, and I guess from yeah, so from kind of sorry, wait, I completely lost my train of thought. What was the question? The
I said something about organization lose their focus
Yeah.
when they stop caring.
Yeah, yeah. So I think if you go from, like, so you learn all of the ways that you're supposed to build stuff, but I think somewhere
Yeah.
in the process, like organizations, like they lose that, like that common sense, right? Like that, like,
Mm-hmm.
why are we doing this? What's important? Um, so you start to abstract things, or like you're disconnected from the end result, and so yeah, I think you start to lose that focus. And so I guess like kind of reminding yourself of like why are we doing this, and what are, I guess, going back to like kind of first principles, or at least like I think that's why like jobs to be done are quite an important framework, because people, like, you bring it back to, okay, what is the user actually trying to do here? And because I think it's very easy to kind of get lost in the theoreticals or in the bureaucracy or in the this is how we always did it kind of arguments, unfortunately.
Yeah, it takes a lot of energy to sort of like go against all these bureaucratic structures that have been put in place because you wanted a structural way to milk that cow or to count that money, and to say, hey, let's go against this. Let's give more freedom to everyone so we can start exploring again. But give more freedom to everyone means taking power from people that used to have power for such a long time. So it's just about rebalancing the power structure in the organization. And that's where often I see a lot of pushback in organization, because now all of a sudden you're proposing not a totally but a new way of working where people can make more choices by themselves. So I, I kind of see the importance of jobs to be done frameworks that sort of like structure all of this, but also at the same time sometimes I feel like having too many structural frameworks to sort of organize the work might backfire, such as OKRs or jobs to be done.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that's where like going back to kind of the craftsmanship, like and kind of like always questioning like let's do what works. Like yeah, there's all these frameworks, and then everyone has their interpretation of the frameworks, and then and then it just like, but then you're creating unnecessary overhead potentially. So I think going back to the craftsmanship or the building quality and creating that value for users and for the business, like I think that's for me those are the first principles that like we should always refer back to. So because I thought about this like a while back. I was trying to like cluster all of the kind of reasons for conflict within a product organization. And actually, like John Cutler, who's my favorite product person, he's this product evangelist. He used to be at Amplitude, now he's at a new startup. But he writes some great blog posts. Like I love, it's called A Beautiful Mess, which describes product really well, I think. But he talks a lot about like different. So there's he has this chart of like different reasons for dissonance, like why is my head hurting as a product manager, right? He explains all of the reasons that your head might be hurting, and so I think like kind of having an understanding of like where all these conflicts come from, I think makes a lot of sense. So I started clustering them, and I think there's like quality issues, there's timing issues, there's opportunity issues, like either whether they're global opportunities or they're local opportunities, or they're like opportunities per department within the company or business unit within the company. So generally, like those are kind of for me the big clusters. Like I mean, quality and timing comes up a lot, right? Like okay, that thing didn't
Yes.
ship on time. We said it was going to ship then, it didn't happen, or this thing has been in the backlog for this long, and how come it hasn't shipped yet? So or like that thing ships but it's got a ton of bugs, or we've built on bad infrastructure and now we have to like rebuild the infrastructure, and so that like and then it becomes a debate of well we shipped at the time that seemed like the right thing to do, but now we need higher quality and more robust solutions, right? So yeah, so I guess all of that to say, like I think if you're looking for some kind of a North Star along the way, I think craftsmanship is a nice place to focus. Going back to what you were talking about earlier, I had the chance to meet Martin Fowler. Like if there's anyone
Wow.
I want to name drop, it's Martin Fowler. And so he's one of the godfathers of programming. So he's the chief science officer at ThoughtWorks, and I went to a ThoughtWorks event a few years back. This is actually through Hilti. So like the opportunities that Hilti brought me were just like incredible. And so I had dinner with him on the New York set at Paramount Studios in London, in Los Angeles. So they brought us to the set of the New York, whatever, at the studios, and so we're sitting there, and like I was just in awe, like I went kind of my jaw down, like
Yeah.
just kind of like this person is a legend. He was just so relaxed and chill, and just kind of like such an articulate kind of human being. But he really espouses kind of the need for craftsmanship, and we talked a little bit about okay, I think the problem with kind of not the problem, but something that is missing when people talk about agile is the
Yeah.
importance of craftsmanship, because you can be doing all of these things. You
Mm.
can use all the frameworks that you want jobs to be done,
Mm.
Scrum, Kanban, any number of extreme programming, whatever it might be. But like, if you don't focus, if quality is not like part of that discussion, it doesn't
100%.
matter. And this is the overlap, I think, with design, right?
Mm.
And I think
Mm.
you have different types of product people. Some are more design minded,
Mm.
and what I find is that the
Mm.
design product managers or the design product people, there is more of a focus on delight, or how do you ship quality.
Mhm.
I mean, also the same applies to architecture and kind of art engineering. Designed focused, technical design focused product managers also, I think, display this. So yeah, so I think, I mean, that was just so that I could name drop Martin Fowler, basically. But but I really believe that like craftsmanship is incredibly important.
So, political science. You probably by then, when you started political science, or you when you went, you look back and you realize that why the hell I did study political science. But now you're at such a political, you're handling such a political role, if I may, in such a big organization where you have to deal with so many people and manage a lot of different um, expectations and priorities and budget and what have you. Looking back and reflecting on what you study and what you learn, how do you see that help you for the role that you are managing right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's also something that I've tried to explain, like making the shift from working kind of I guess, as a diplomat officially. Even though, like, when you're a diplomat, you don't realize you're a diplomat. Like, you're surrounded, you're
Yeah.
surrounded by all these diplomats, but like, you don't really think of yourself as that person. You just, what I remember, like, we also like would complain a lot. That was like a big part of being in an international organization, was just to complain about how the system seemed quite broken. And
Yeah.
and I think that, like, also when you work at the UN, you have like really high ideals, especially like I was quite young, I was 25, and then you get faced with reality, and then so you have this there's yeah, I guess there's this like shock between the two. But I think the one like transferable skill certainly
Mm.
I mean, in product, you're mediating a lot of different interests, right?
Mhm.
And you're trying to find some level of consensus and compromise. And so I think that is the political side of it, is that, like, I often ask product managers in interviews, or like product people when I interview them, what's the hardest thing
Mm.
about working in product? And the answer, one of my favorite answers actually, was being a know-it-all without looking like a know-it-all. And I think I I think, because you have to somehow remain likable. You need to somehow
Mm.
appear knowledgeable. And combining those two skill sets are not always obvious, right? And so I think, as,
Mhm.
as a product person, you're in the middle of a lot of different things, but you still need to interact with everyone. So you definitely
Mm.
need to make sure that you're not burning bridges in the process, but that you remain sufficiently motivated. So going back to like the reasons for dissonance and conflict, I think being able to pinpoint how you're feeling in a certain way, and having like a certain amount of control over your, not so much control over your emotions, but just understanding why you're feeling certain ways, and then understanding why
Mhm.
other people are feeling certain ways, I think is quite important. And I think, for me, what's worked really well is like, so my father was a meditation instructor. Well, he was a stockbroker that
Mm.
couldn't sleep, and then he became a meditation instructor on the side. And
Wow.
yeah, so
I
he
need to
he
have a
meditated.
podcast with him too.
Definitely, I mean, he's a fascinating character. So he still meditates like 2 or 3 hours a day. Ever since he was in his 30s, and he's just so
Mm.
incredibly chill. And he's also like quite able to, like, pinpoint why he's feeling certain ways, because a lot of what I guess meditation is, and I never really did proper meditation courses or anything like that. I just kind of observed my
Mm.
dad and whatever he would say. And I actually, like, I had like a mantra when I was 6 years old, and then when I was 12 years old again. So whenever I'm kind of like in a state where I'm not really sure, or I'm feeling, somewhat anxious, I always go back to kind
Mm.
of that mantra that, like, kind of, like, chills me out, I guess. But yeah, I think a lot of meditation is just like closing your eyes, and then thinking and observing and kind of seeing how you feel and why you feel certain ways. And I think having kind of that mental stability and control is very important if you work in product, just because you feel the whole range of human emotions.
Yeah.
And not everyone always has your best interests in mind, but you
Mm.
should try to have their best interests in mind, right? So
Uh-huh.
it is a challenging position
Hold on a
to
second.
be in.
Can you elaborate on this? Not
Well,
everyone has the best. I need you to unpack it.
yeah. So the way, so what I mean by that is, you're dealing with stakeholders that have like clear kind of goals or kind of aspirations, right? So they want
Mm.
something to be done for a certain reason, and
Uh,
and then I mean you could also say that as a product manager, you have your underlying needs as well, right? You want to ship something fast, you want to drive
mm,
outcomes, but generally what you're supposed to prioritize is the best interest of the company and the customer and finding some balance in
mm,
between those two, right? But you also need to be able to recognize sometimes when maybe your biases and assumptions are leading you off, right? So that's where I think it's important to have inputs from a variety of stakeholders, right? So I did a presentation a few months back where I was kind of like
mm,
looking at the different hats that you wear as a product manager, and one of those hats is the negotiator, where you are negotiating
mm.
all of these different interests, right? And so yeah, and so I think the hardest part of being that negotiator is kind of realigning yourself to kind of reminding yourself, okay, look, it's not important that I'm the most popular person, it's not important that I'm the most liked person, it's important that I'm driving customer and business value, and that's what really matters. But it's easier said than done, because as a human you have your biases, your lived experiences have caused you to believe things in a certain way. So you always need to kind of be open to being challenged by your subject matter experts, who often like know a lot more and then a lot more in depth on certain topics, right? So I defer a lot to other people actually. You don't want to be completely kind of spineless. You certainly want to have some core
Yeah.
foundational knowledge, but a lot of the time I think it makes a lot of sense to delegate hard decisions to people that understand that subject matter better than you do. But you're there to coordinate, and that's I think where the overlap with kind of the work you do as a diplomat is significant, because you're a convening authority. You're bringing people together to make better decisions, hopefully more efficiently than the UN, which is not really hard to achieve.
I think something that I feel like a product executives or designers needs to be able to access to when they need it is their intuition.
Mhm.
It's just always a sort of like a play between my intuition and what kind of information I'm receiving from outside world. and and often I feel like people who have explored different topics, done different things, been active in different areas, I don't know how to explain it, but they sort of like have have a clear relationship with their intuition, and they could sort of like be in middle of four different subject matter expert and two other product managers, and sort of like hear everything and say, hey, okay, cool, let's do this and this and this and this and this. Like, how do you see the role of intuition in your sort of like daily activities, and yeah, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so I do believe that like intuition or like product sense is a massive part of being like a great product, especially product manager, right? But even I guess product designer as well, and UX researcher, or engineer, right? I think being aware of like your I guess it's harder said than done to like kind of be aware of like well, you are not, first of all, you are not the user, right? It's like you constantly need to remind yourself of
Mm,
that. I think you can get away with it in the early days. I also heard that, like, for example, Revolut, like, my understanding is that, like, Nick, the CEO, still looks at every design, and he has veto over every
wow.
every every view, right? And so has to rely on intuition, and I think most people that work in product think that's a terrible idea. And I'm not going to say for 100% that it is a terrible idea, because they've been quite successful in the process. But they've also built a culture that most people would not necessarily want to be part of. I've heard very differing stories, right? But like undeniably, they've been successful at what they're trying to achieve.
Right.
They're not trying to win an award for culture, but they're trying to grow, and they're trying to build, I guess imagine the largest neobank, right? So I'd say like product sense is incredibly important. How does it manifest in the day to day? I mean, I think it as you kind of move beyond like VP level, you start to get a lot less hands-on. But from time to time, you do actually get into the details, and I think you should get into the details. And so what I find what
Right.
happens is that I get involved in design sprints where we see a gap in knowledge, right? Or where we haven't really built out discovery on certain big opportunities. And that's usually where I'll dive in and get into the details. And so I still find that I do need to have a certain understanding of how products work. And so the way that I achieve that is just by being really very curious about new technologies and new products. Like my phone has, I don't know how many apps, like problem is I just don't delete them, and then there's like pages and pages of apps all over my phone. But I take screenshots. Like at Grover, I was like, apparently I didn't realize this until like later on, like before I left, but someone was like, Johann just sends screenshots all the time. And I'm just constantly sending people screenshots of things that I like or that don't make sense, or whether it's on our product or other products that I think are great, because there's just an unlimited source of inspiration out there from great designers and great product people.
Right.
That's for me, that's like a huge resource that and I know that there's certain purists that would tell you don't look what other people have built, just solve the problem for the user. But I think it's not as black and white as that, right? And
No.
in order for you to have that product sense, I think you do need to just play with a lot of different products, and
Absolutely.
and have this like repertoire kind of inside your brain. And also like I think what was really nice, like with my old CTO and I, like even when we were building Sleep Out, there was this almost like kind of telekinesis in how we would discuss things, right? Because I could, and I think that's a really great relationship between a product lead and a product manager, and a tech lead as well, where you just kind of, you don't even really have to explain it, but like you use a few keywords and then they understand you're talking about like that certain flow or that certain, and you develop your own kind of language around those things. And like those are the meetings, like when you have those meetings and you know that everyone's kind of understanding each other, that like super motivating, because you're like, okay, this feels like we're a high performing team that really gets it.
So it's been a full-on conversation. It's been such a deep conversation. So, thanks a lot for going deep with me. And like I know I put you on certain spots, but you graciously like went in there and like tried to talk about your experiences, which I really appreciate it. So I would like to end this conversation with another deep topic. And I think I need to ask this from you, because you are one of the few persons that could have a really, at least a good reflection on the topic, is failure. Product managers often are under pressure. As you climb up the ladder, you go to the senior roles, executive roles, the pressure mounts and accumulates. And after, of course, curiosity with technology, you need to be able to play with things and like, break things around. Sometimes you ship something wrong, or like you got your strategy wrong, what have you. What doesn't matter what happens down in the background, that you end up making the wrong decision, but failure occurred. What's your take? There's a lot of like young folks that are trying to come up as a product designer, as a manager, listening to this, Johann. What's your reflection on failure? How should folks look at the failure?
Yeah, I mean, I think I could answer that in this, the kind of I guess the standard answer would be, failure is great, learn from your mistakes.
No, please. No.
I think, I mean, it's interesting because I've actually been doing like a lot of like angel investments recently, and you start to look at failure very differently, because now you're putting your money on the line, and now
you're playing poker with money.
yeah, exactly. So, and and there's very few things that I regret in life, right? But by definition, when you're doing angel investments, you're going to fail a certain
A
amount of
100%.
a certain amount of the time. So actually, they say like when you write a check, just like it's a write off, like you
It's
just like
gone.
forget about it. It's and so then you start to think, okay, well then it's about once in a while I'll have successes. I think there was this I think he's a Greek basketball player based in the U.S. I can't remember his name. He had this really great answer to one of these like sports reporters about whether the past few seasons have been a failure because they haven't won the whatever the NBA championship is, and he said, look, this is a job, and I approach it every day, and so I really like that approach because it's like, okay, once in a while you may win the championship, but it's not that it's a failure because you didn't win the championship every year, right? It's like, I think he cites Michael Jordan. He's like, did Michael Jordan fail in the years that they didn't win the NBA championships? Like
Right.
no one would say that. So I think I can't remember the guy's name actually. Maybe you can add it in the show notes. But like, I felt that was like a really great way to kind of look at successes and failures. And then also like I think a lot about like regret, right? Like, should you ever regret any decision that you make? And I think the bad thing about regret is that as soon as you start having regrets, then I think it limits the decisions that you make into the future, because then you start to have this like PTSD of like having additional regrets. Whereas I think the mentality or
I
mindset
see.
around not having regrets allows you to make decisions like it's the first time. And so that's a little bit the way I approach it, is that like it's day zero every time, and you have, you can fail or you can win, but ultimately like the worst that will happen is not that bad. So I'd always kind of approach it in that way, and that's always been kind of my philosophy. And like every time I moved to a new country or I started a new job, it was always like, the worst case is not that bad, and that I think prevented me from having this kind of paralysis that comes around being afraid and not acting because of it.
I love this answer. I really couldn't imagine a better way of ending this podcast. Wow. Okay. Johann, thanks a lot for being with me, spar with me, going back and forth with me. I know you have a busy schedule, and I know you've been sick in the weekend. So thanks a lot. Appreciate you. And I wish you a fantastic summer and rest of the year.
Thank you very much, Behrad. No, I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Yarek, Aisha, Behrad, 2 episodes every week. Leancast, product innovation and UX design podcast.